When Ethan returns to his grandmother's small-town bakery, he finds it teetering on the brink of closure, tangled in family conflicts, and threatened by the lure of quick profits. With the help of an unlikely ally, his estranged brother, Kevin, Ethan embarks on a journey to save the bakery, discovering along the way the true cost of love, tradition, and the quiet power of perseverance. But as the townspeople rally around him, and the past meets the present, Ethan faces hard choices about family, sacrifice, and what it truly means to carry on a legacy. Will he be able to preserve what his grandmother built, or will he be forced to choose between his family's heritage and a new future? If you're ready for a story that celebrates connection and the beauty of resilience, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more inspiring stories. And after you've watched, share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know what touched you most. Now let's step inside Winter Hill Bakery, where love is baked fresh every day. The sky was barely beginning to lighten, a faint, gray dawn casting cold shadows over the narrow streets of Winter Hill. The soft hum of street lamps buzzed as they dimmed, surrendering to the first hint of daylight. Ethan Carter pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders as he reached the door to Winter Hill Bakery, his family's small business on the corner of the town square. The building stood quiet and shadowed, yet it seemed to hold its own presence, an air of anticipation. Ethan's fingers, cold and stiff from the chill, worked the key into the lock, and with a gentle push, he opened the door, breathing in the faint, lingering scent of flour and yeast that clung to the walls. The bakery hadn't been much more than a place to work since Rose had passed away. Without her warmth and laughter echoing through the space, it felt as though a blanket of silence had settled over every corner, every shelf. But Ethan, even with the persistent ache in his chest, continued to follow his routine. Once inside, he switched on the lights, casting a warm glow over the space. Tables sat empty, polished clean from the day before, with the glass display case vacant and waiting to be filled. He made his way to the back, hanging his coat and scarf on the wall hooks and slipping his hands into a worn apron. Its faded fabric bore faint flour stains that even the strongest detergent couldn't erase, remnants of countless mornings he'd spent beside Rose as she kneaded dough, laughing at his imperfect attempts to shape a proper loaf. That was before. Now Ethan worked alone. With his hands practiced and steady, he began the morning routine, measuring flour, water, and yeast, feeling the mixture begin to take on a life of its own beneath his hands. The quiet comfort of the process settled over him, familiar and grounding, the rhythm of it almost enough to make him forget the struggle his business was facing. Almost. He kneaded the dough until it was soft and supple, then let it rest while he prepared the next batch, losing himself in the repetition. But behind his steady hands and focused movements, thoughts of his brother's recent proposal simmered in his mind. "Sell the bakery, Ethan." Kevin's words echoed, edged with a practical detachment that infuriated Ethan even as it made him question himself. "Let go of this place. There's nothing left here but old memories and a lot of hard work. You don't have to do this alone." Alone. The word left a bitter taste in Ethan's mouth as he shaped each loaf, focusing on the weight of the dough in his hands, the feel of it folding beneath his fingers. He had long accepted that loneliness was his companion now. It wasn't something he'd chosen, but it was his reality, like the cool morning air and the flour-dusted countertops. His mind drifted back to that night, just over a month ago, when Kevin had come to him with a formal letter in hand. The letterhead had been bold, glossy, the kind used by developers with large plans and little regard for tradition. The developers wanted to purchase the entire corner of the square, Kevin had explained. A sleek new shopping center was in the works, something that would bring the town into the 21st century. Ethan had stared at the paper, his heart clenching as he imagined Winter Hill without the bakery, without this place that had been the heart of his family for 3 generations. How could Kevin see the bakery as nothing more than a relic, a shell of the past? But Kevin's words had only sharpened his point, trying to coax Ethan into signing the papers, to let go of the bakery, to move on. Ethan hadn't argued. Instead, he had listened, nodded once, and then politely declined to decide. Now, as the dawn began to peek through the bakery's large front windows, casting a soft glow over the flour-dusted surfaces, Ethan looked around, feeling that familiar tug of sorrow and gratitude twist within him. This bakery was all he had left of Rose, of his family, of everything he had once loved. He turned his attention back to the bread, pressing the dough in a shape before setting it aside to rise. The smell of yeast and flour filled the air, comforting and nostalgic. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wood floor beneath his feet and the hum of the oven as it warmed. Winter's chill seeped through the cracks in the windows, frosting the corners of the glass. As he began arranging the first trays of bread, Ethan noticed movement outside the window. A figure, small and hunched against the cold, pressed close to the glass, peering inside. He squinted, trying to make out the face, and felt a pang of surprise. It was a young girl, her coat thin and frayed, her cheeks rosy from the chill, staring at the display case with an intense gaze, her dark eyes filled with a hunger that went beyond mere appetite. She couldn't have been more than 10 or 11, yet there was a worn, almost tired look about her. Her dark, tangled hair peeked out from beneath a woolen cap that seemed a size too small, and her eyes followed every movement of Ethan's hands as he set the loaves onto the tray. Ethan hesitated. She looked lost and out of place, a ghostly figure against the soft glow of the bakery's warmth. She seemed to notice him watching and quickly averted her gaze, pressing her chapped hands against her sides as if to stop herself from reaching out. In that moment, Ethan felt something deep and familiar stir within him, a memory, a faint echo of Rose's voice. Bread nourishes the body, but kindness nourishes the soul, she had often said, her hands busy at work, her smile soft and warm as she shared the loaves with friends and strangers alike. It was a sentiment he'd heard many times, but one that had faded in his mind after her passing. Without thinking twice, he moved toward the door, brushing the flour off his hands. The chill seeped in as he opened it, and the girl, startled by the sound, looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. "Here," he said softly, holding out a roll still warm from the oven. The steam rose from it, swirling in the cold morning air. "Take it." For a moment, she didn't move, her eyes darting from the roll to his face, as if unsure whether to trust this unexpected kindness. But as the aroma reached her, her hesitation melted, and she took the bread with small, trembling hands, cradling it like a treasure. Her eyes softened, and a faint smile touched her lips, though she quickly glanced away, her cheeks reddening. "Thank you," she whispered, almost too softly to hear, and without another word, she turned and hurried off down the street, clutching the bread tightly. Ethan watched her go, a strange warmth spreading in his chest, the kind that was both comforting and bittersweet. He closed the door gently, lingering for a moment as he watched her small figure disappear into the maze of streets. Back inside, the bakery felt somehow different, as if her presence had left a trace of warmth that hadn't been there before. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a flicker of something he hadn't dared to hope for, a sense of connection, a reminder that even in his solitude, there were others out there who shared his world, however fleetingly. As he returned to his work, he caught sight of his reflection in the glass, his face lined and weary, but softened by a glimmer of something he couldn't quite name. Ethan returned to his work, his hands moving rhythmically as he prepared more dough for the morning's customers. But his thoughts lingered on the girl. In her face, he had seen something that had jolted him from the fog he had been living in for so long. There was a vulnerability, a hunger, not just for food, but for something deeper, something that resonated with the ache he felt inside. The morning wore on, the faint light of dawn growing brighter and spreading warmth into the bakery. Slowly, the streets outside began to fill with the usual morning bustle, shopkeepers unlocking their doors, neighbors calling out greetings as they crossed the square, and the postman making his early rounds. Ethan moved back and forth, setting out loaves, pastries, and rolls in the display case, arranging them carefully to show the bakery at its best. The sweet scent of fresh bread mingled with a hint of cinnamon and nutmeg from the morning's first batch of pastries, and the bakery began to take on its usual inviting warmth. Just as he finished setting out the last of the bread, the bell over the door chimed, and in walked his oldest employee and friend, Lucas Evans. Lucas was a retired baker who had been helping Ethan ever since Rose had passed. He was a man in his 60s, tall and wiry, with silver hair that fell in soft waves over his forehead, and a steady, unhurried way about him that soothed both employees and customers alike. "Mornin', Ethan," Lucas greeted, his voice low and gruff, yet always with a touch of warmth. "Morning, Lucas," Ethan replied, managing a faint smile. Lucas had an uncanny ability to sense when something was weighing on Ethan, and Ethan could see the man's eyes studying him as he moved closer to the counter. "You look like you've been up a while," Lucas remarked, glancing at the perfectly arranged display. "New recipe?" Ethan shook his head. "No, just wanted to make sure everything was ready before the morning rush." Lucas nodded, giving him a knowing look but letting the topic drop. He reached for an apron and tied it around his waist, then set to work with his usual quiet efficiency. For a while, the two men worked side by side in companionable silence, filling trays and setting them out, as they did every morning. But as the sun climbed higher, Ethan's thoughts returned to the girl. He wondered where she'd come from, and why he'd never seen her around town before. Winter Hill wasn't big. Everyone knew everyone else, and new faces rarely went unnoticed. Finally, unable to shake the thought, Ethan decided to share what was on his mind. "Lucas," he said quietly, his hands pausing over a tray of scones. "Did you see a girl outside the bakery earlier? Young, maybe 10 or 11. Looked like she could use a good meal." Lucas raised an eyebrow, wiping his flour-dusted hands on a towel as he listened. "A girl? No, cansayidit. But it's a chilly morning. Maybe she just stopped by for a bit of warmth." Ethan nodded, but something about the girl had felt different. Her eyes, her hesitant smile as she took the bread, the way she clutched it like it was something precious. All of it lingered with him. "You know, Rose used to do that all the time," Lucas added, his voice softening with memory. "Whenever someone came in who looked like they could use a bit of kindness, she'd make sure they didn't leave empty-handed." Ethan looked away, the memory of his wife still a sharp ache in his heart. Rose had been the soul of the bakery, the one who had brought life and light into the place, who had known every customer's name and remembered the little details of their lives. Without her, the bakery had become just a shell of what it had been. "Yeah," Ethan replied quietly, his voice barely more than a whisper. "She always believed that a loaf of bread could do more than fill a stomach. Said it could warm a heart, too." Lucas gave a nod of agreement, his gaze thoughtful. "Maybe it's time you started listening to her again," he said gently, his words more of a suggestion than a command. "This place was always more than a business, Ethan. People don't come here just for the bread. They come for the comfort of it, the connection." Ethan considered this, a slight weight lifting from his heart as he worked. He could feel the truth of Lucas's words. The bakery had always been a place of warmth and kindness, of community. And maybe, in his grief, he'd forgotten that. The morning rush began, and soon the bakery was filled with the familiar faces of Winter Hill. Neighbors greeted each other warmly as they picked up their daily loaves, sharing small talk over the counter, and Ethan found himself drawn into the rhythm of it, feeling, for the first time in a while, a sense of belonging. That evening, as the last customer left and Lucas prepared to close up, Ethan took a moment to step outside. The streetlights had come on, casting a warm glow over the cobblestone square, and a thin layer of frost glittered on the rooftops. The air was crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke from nearby chimneys. As he stood there, gazing across the quiet square, he noticed a figure approaching, a woman bundled in layers of scarves and coats, her steps slow and steady. She had an air of familiarity about her, though her face was shadowed by the brim of her hat. When she drew closer, she stopped, lifting her face to meet his eyes, and he felt a jolt of recognition. It was Helen Graham, an older woman he hadn't seen in years, someone who had once been a regular at the bakery, and if he remembered correctly, a close friend of his grandmother. "Helen?" he asked, surprised to see her after so long. She nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Hello, Ethan. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," he replied, stepping aside to let her into the bakery, where the warmth still lingered. "It's been a long time. How have you been? She hesitated, her gaze drifting over the interior of the bakery, taking in the familiar shelves and counters. Oh, I manage, she said, her voice soft but steady. Life is a way of carrying on, whether we're ready for it or not. There was a pause, a brief silence filled with the quiet hum of the bakery. Ethan watched her, noting the lines of age and hardship on her face, the way her hands trembled slightly as she held them clasped in front of her. It's good to see you again, he said finally, breaking the silence. I didn't know you were still in town. Helen gave a small nod. I keep to myself mostly. Winter's not easy, and these old bones don't travel as well as they used to. But I've been meaning to stop by. I wanted to see if you might need some extra help around here. Nothing too strenuous, of course. Ethan looked at her, surprised by the offer. The bakery was a small operation, and he and Lucas managed well enough on their own. But he could see something in Helen's eyes, a quiet determination, a need to be useful, to have a place to belong. You know, she continued, her voice growing softer, your grandmother and I used to bake together all the time. She taught me some of her recipes, things that most people around here don't remember anymore. I could share them with you if you'd like. Maybe it would help bring some life back to this place. Ethan felt a pang of nostalgia. He could still remember his grandmother bustling around the kitchen, flour dusting her apron, the sweet scent of her famous bread filling the air. She had been the heart of their family, the one who had started the bakery with nothing but a few recipes and a dream. That would mean a lot, he said quietly, feeling a lump form in his throat. I'd love to learn those recipes. And if you'd like to help out, even just a little, I'd be glad to have you here. Helen's face softened, her eyes glistening with a faint sheen of tears. Thank you, Ethan. I think I'd like that very much. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the past settling between them, the memories of loved ones lost and traditions long forgotten. And in that quiet moment, Ethan felt a spark of hope, a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. It was as if, in inviting Helen into the bakery, he had opened a door not just to her, but to the warmth and connection he had been missing. He didn't know if this small change would be enough to save the bakery, to bring it back to life. But as he looked at Helen, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to do it alone. The following morning, Ethan arrived at the bakery to find Helen already there, her hands dusted with flour, her movements graceful and practiced despite the age evident in her worn hands. She greeted him with a warm smile, her eyes crinkling at the corners. You're here early, Ethan remarked, slipping his coat onto a nearby hook and donning his apron. Old habits, Helen replied with a soft chuckle. Your grandmother and I always started early, long before the first light of day. It was her way, and it became mine. She glanced down at the dough she'd been kneading, working it slowly, methodically, the way his grandmother had once done. Ethan watched her for a moment, feeling a swell of gratitude. It was as if a piece of his grandmother had come back to the bakery through Helen's presence, her soft voice, her gentle hands. And in the quiet stillness of the morning, he could almost hear his grandmother's laughter, the way she used to hum as she worked. What are you making? He asked, moving closer to get a better look. Helen's smile grew as she pressed the dough with a reverent touch. This is a recipe your grandmother called the bread of remembrance. She used to bake it during special times, when the community needed a little extra comfort. People would line up all the way down the block just to get a loaf. Ethan looked at the dough with a new appreciation. I don't think I've ever tried making it. Is it complicated? Not in the way you might think, Helen replied. The ingredients are simple enough, but it's the way you handle the dough that makes the difference. This bread needs a little more care, a softer hand, a touch of patience. She moved aside, motioning for him to take over. Why don't you try? I'll guide you. Ethan hesitated, then stepped forward, his hands settling into the dough. He could feel the resilience of it beneath his fingers, the subtle resistance as he kneaded it, following Helen's instructions as she showed him how to fold and shape the loaf with careful, measured movements. Your grandmother used to say that bread is like people, Helen murmured, her eyes soft with memory. It needs time to rise, to be shaped, to become something more than it starts out as. She believed that a good baker wasn't just someone with skill, but someone with heart. Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. His grandmother had always been a woman of quiet wisdom, her words gentle, but full of meaning. As he shaped the dough under Helen's watchful eye, he felt a new appreciation for the craft he'd taken for granted for so long. This wasn't just bread. It was a piece of history, a connection to his family, to his past. The hours slipped by, and soon the bakery filled with the warm, rich aroma of the bread of remembrance. The scent was different from anything he had baked before, a blend of spices and sweetness that felt both comforting and nostalgic. As the loaves baked, the scent drifted out onto the street, drawing the attention of passers-by who paused, drawn to the bakery by the familiar smell. By the time the bread was ready to come out of the oven, a small crowd had gathered outside, their faces pressed against the glass, waiting with anticipation. Ethan felt a sense of pride as he placed the loaves in the display, each one a golden, fragrant tribute to his family's legacy. The bell over the door jingled as the first customers filed in, their eyes widening as they took in the sight of the fresh bread. An elderly woman near the front of the line clutched her coat tightly around her as she stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the bread of remembrance. "Is that?" she began, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "My grandmother's recipe. Helen was kind enough to teach it to me." The woman's eyes filled with tears as she took the loaf from him, her fingers tracing its warm surface. "I remember this bread. I haven't tasted it since I was a girl. Your grandmother, she used to give me a piece every morning on my way to school. It was the only breakfast I had back then." The sincerity in her voice, the way she cradled the loaf as if it were something precious, touched Ethan deeply. It was in that moment that he realized the bakery was more than just a business. It was a lifeline, a place that held memories, stories, connections that went beyond flour and yeast. One by one, customers came forward, each with their own memory of the bakery, of his grandmother, of the bread of remembrance. They shared stories of simpler times, of kindnesses given and received, and Ethan listened, feeling his heart swell with a new sense of purpose. As the weeks passed, the bread of remembrance became a staple at the bakery, drawing in customers from all over town and beyond. Each loaf that went out was more than just bread. It was a piece of history, a symbol of the community's resilience, a reminder of the connections that bound them all together. And in the midst of it all, Ethan found himself feeling a renewed sense of joy. The bakery was thriving in a way it hadn't in years, and for the first time since Rose's passing, he felt like he was truly honoring her memory, carrying on the work they had once done together. But even as the bakery flourished, the familiar pressure from Kevin lingered at the edges of Ethan's thoughts, a shadow that darkened his newfound joy. Kevin hadn't visited since their last conversation, but Ethan knew his brother well enough to expect that he hadn't given up. One late afternoon, just as Ethan was closing up the bakery, he looked up to see Kevin standing outside, his expression unreadable as he watched through the window. With a resigned sigh, Ethan walked to the door and opened it, gesturing for his brother to come in. "Kevin," he greeted, trying to keep his tone neutral. Kevin stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the shelves of fresh bread, the warm, welcoming space that Ethan had worked so hard to create. His mouth tightened, a hint of frustration in his eyes. "It smells good in here," he remarked, though his voice held little warmth. "Thanks," Ethan replied, crossing his arms as he leaned against the counter. "What brings you by?" Kevin didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked around, his gaze lingering on the bread of remembrance displayed prominently in the case. Finally, he turned back to Ethan, his expression hardening. "I came to remind you that the developers aren't going to wait forever," he said, his tone firm. "They're offering a lot of money, Ethan, enough to take care of everything you'll ever need. And honestly, I don't see why you're holding on to this place. It's just a bakery." Ethan felt a surge of anger rise within him, but he forced himself to stay calm. "It's more than just a bakery to me, Kevin. This place is part of our family, part of who we are." Kevin shook his head, a look of exasperation crossing his face. "It's old-fashioned, Ethan. This town is changing, and holding on to the past isn't going to help anyone. A shopping center would bring jobs, opportunities. The whole town would benefit." Ethan clenched his jaw, his hands balling into fists at his sides. You know, for someone who claims to care about this town, you seem awfully eager to tear it down and replace it with something that has no heart, no history. Kevin's eyes flashed with irritation. Heart and history don't pay the bills. This isn't about some sentimental idea of family, Ethan. It's about progress, about giving people what they want. Maybe you don't know what people want. Ethan shot back, his voice rising. Have you even been around to see the people who come in here? To hear the stories they share? This place means something to them. It's more than just bread. There was a tense silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Kevin looked away, his expression hardening as he struggled to contain his frustration. I didn't come here to argue, he said finally, his voice cold. But I'm not going to let you ruin this opportunity. Think about what you're giving up, Ethan. Think about what you're throwing away. With that, Kevin turned and walked out, leaving Ethan standing alone in the quiet of the bakery. The echo of his brother's footsteps faded into the distance, but the anger and frustration lingered, a dull ache in Ethan's chest. As he stood there, his gaze fell on the bread of remembrance, still warm and fragrant in the display case. He thought of his grandmother, of her hands kneading dough with patience and love, of the way she had poured her heart into every loaf she made. And he knew in that moment that he couldn't give up. No matter what Kevin said, no matter how much pressure the developers applied, he couldn't let go of the bakery. It was more than just a building, more than a business. It was his family's legacy, a piece of his heart, and he would fight for it. Ethan took a deep breath, his resolve strengthening as he looked around the bakery, at the memories that filled every corner. This place was his home, his purpose, and he would do whatever it took to protect it. Ethan watched his brother disappear down the street, the weight of their conversation pressing heavily on him. The bakery was quiet now, the warm, familiar scent still lingering in the air, but Kevin's words left a cold shadow. Ethan knew Kevin saw the bakery as a relic, a place with no future, just a shell of the past that they'd grown up with. But to Ethan, it was more than that. It was a piece of his family's history, a reminder of his grandmother's dreams, of Rose's laughter, of the countless mornings spent side by side, making something that meant more than just bread. And now, with Helen's return and the bread of remembrance filling the bakery again, it was also a symbol of renewal. He sighed deeply, crossing to the back of the shop where Helen was cleaning up the remnants of the day's baking. She looked up as he entered, her sharp eyes reading the tension in his face immediately. "Kevin again?" she asked, setting down the cloth she'd been using to wipe the counters. Ethan nodded, pressing his hands into his pockets. He's not backing down. He's convinced that selling this place is the best thing for both of us. He talks about progress and opportunity, but he doesn't understand. He doesn't see what this place really is. Helen watched him thoughtfully, a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Sometimes people don't see what's right in front of them until it's gone," she said gently. "Your brother may think he understands what this place needs, but he's forgotten the heart of it, the meaning behind it. You can't build that with money or new developments." Ethan exhaled, feeling a bit of the tension release at her words. "I don't know how to make him see that. All he sees are dollar signs and possibilities. He thinks I'm holding on to something that doesn't matter." Helen reached out, placing a warm, steadying hand on his arm. "Ethan, you have to hold on because you're holding on to something he doesn't understand. This place isn't just a business. It's a connection to your family, to the people who walk through that door every morning, to the community that keeps it alive. Don't let him make you forget that." Ethan felt a swell of gratitude for Helen's unwavering support. She had become more than just an old family friend. She was a partner, a confidant, someone who understood the depth of his commitment to the bakery. "I'm not giving up," he said firmly. "I won't let him take this place away from us." Helen's smile widened, pride shining in her eyes. "Good. That's the spirit your grandmother had. She would have been proud of you, Ethan." The two of them fell into a comfortable silence as they finished tidying up. Ethan felt the weight of his decision settle into something solid within him, a quiet resolve that steadied his heart. No matter what Kevin said, no matter how tempting the offer, he couldn't give up the bakery. It was his duty to protect this place, for his family, for the town, and now, he realized for himself. The next morning dawned cold and clear, the the sun casting a pale light over the frosted streets as Ethan prepared the day's batches. He was stirring a bowl of dough when he heard the faint chime of the front door. Wiping his hands on his apron, he walked over to the front, expecting to see a customer. But instead, standing just inside the door was the girl from earlier that week, the one he'd given the role to. She looked smaller in the morning light, her clothes still thin and worn, her cheeks red from the cold. Her large, dark eyes glanced around the bakery with a mixture of awe and hesitation. "Good morning," Ethan greeted her gently, noting the way she stood with her hands tucked under her arms for warmth. "Bakkarein?" The girl nodded shyly, her gaze dropping to the floor. I was just passing by." Ethan smiled, picking up a freshly baked roll from the counter. "Well, since you're here, why don't you have another? It's warm." The girl hesitated, but when she looked up and saw the kindness in his eyes, she reached out and took the roll, cradling it in her hands as if it were something precious. "Thank you," she whispered, a faint smile crossing her face. He watched her for a moment, curious about her situation. "Do you live around here?" She nodded, glancing out the window toward the far side of town. "My grandma and we live by the old mill." Ethan's mind immediately went to the dilapidated houses on the outskirts of Winter Hill. The area had fallen into disrepair years ago, and it was a rough place to live, especially in the harsh New England winter. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Lily," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well, Lily, it's nice to see you again. You're always welcome here." He paused, watching her carefully. "Does your grandma know you're here?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, and she nodded slowly. "Yes, she knows. She used to come here when she was younger. She says this place has special bread that makes you remember things." Ethan felt a pang in his chest. The bread of remembrance. It was the very loaf Helen had reintroduced to the bakery, and one that his grandmother had made for years. Lily's words held a gravity beyond her young age, a reverence that made him realize just how much this bread meant to the people in Winter Hill. "Well, Lily," he said softly, "your grandma is right. This bread does help people remember. It's why I make it." Lily's face softened as she took a bite, closing her eyes as she savored the warm, comforting taste. For a moment, Ethan simply watched her, struck by how a simple act of kindness, a simple loaf of bread, could mean so much to someone. After a while, Lily opened her eyes, looking up at him with a hesitant question in her gaze. Could my grandma come, too?" Ethan felt his heart soften further. "Of course. She's welcome anytime." Lily nodded, a shy but grateful smile breaking across her face. She finished the roll, thanked him quietly, and turned to leave. As he watched her small figure disappear into the morning, Ethan couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. This bakery, his family's legacy, was a place of comfort and belonging for people like Lily, for people who needed a reminder that they weren't alone. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, Ethan was wiping down the counters when Helen arrived with Lily's grandmother. The woman was frail, her steps slow and measured as she leaned on Helen's arm, her face lined with years of hardship. But her eyes were clear and kind, her gaze drifting over the bakery with a nostalgic familiarity. "Ethan," Helen said softly, guiding the woman forward. "This is Margaret Willows. She's been in Winter Hill longer than anyone I know." Margaret nodded, her lips curling into a faint smile. "It's good to see you, Ethan. I remember when you were just a boy, helping your grandmother behind the counter. She used to let you mix the dough, even though it made a mess every time." Ethan felt a flush of warmth at her words. "It's nice to meet you again, Mrs. Willows. I didn't realize you still lived here." Margaret chuckled softly, her voice carrying a hint of strength despite her age. "Oh, I don't leave much, not with these old bones. But when Lily told me about the bread of remembrance, well, I couldn't resist." Ethan led them to a small table near the window, pulling out a chair for Margaret and setting a fresh loaf of bread in front of her. Margaret reached out, running her fingers over the loaf with a tenderness that spoke of years gone by, of memories buried but never forgotten. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the bread. "She believed that this bakery could be a place of warmth for everyone." She once told me that bread was like family. It brings people together, no matter how different they are. And she was right. Ethan felt his throat tighten, his heart heavy with a bittersweet sense of loss and pride. His grandmother's legacy was still alive, still touching people's lives in ways he hadn't fully understood until now. Margaret took a small piece of the bread, savoring it slowly, her eyes closing as if she were revisiting memories, each bite unlocking a piece of her past. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of gratitude. "I thought I'd never taste this again." Ethan nodded, unable to find words, but feeling the weight of her appreciation settle in his heart. In that moment, he understood that the bakery was more than just a place of business. It was a lifeline, a place of refuge and belonging for people like Margaret, people who held on to these small pieces of the past as a way of staying connected. As evening approached, Margaret and Helen said their goodbyes, leaving Ethan alone to close up the shop. He moved slowly through the bakery, turning off lights, wiping down counters, but his mind was on Margaret, on the stories she had shared, on the weight of the legacy he carried. He was just about to lock the front door when he felt a wave of determination settle over him. This was his family's legacy, a place of memories, of comfort and connection. No matter what Kevin said, he couldn't let it go. Not for money, not for progress. This was his duty, to carry on what his grandmother had started, to keep this bakery alive, not just for himself, but for the people of Winter Hill. With a deep breath, Ethan locked the door, a sense of peace washing over him. Tomorrow, he would face whatever came his way, but tonight, he would hold on to the memory of Margaret's quiet gratitude, of Lily's shy smile, and of the strength that his family's legacy had given him. And he knew, in his heart, that this was only the beginning of a fight worth fighting. The bakery's recent resurgence had spread quickly through Winter Hill, drawing in familiar faces and new ones alike. Each day, the line stretched out the door, a testament to the town's quiet loyalty. Ethan took solace in the steady rhythm of his work, the comforting familiarity of kneading dough, the hum of conversation that filled the bakery. For the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope that he could keep his family's legacy alive. But despite the bakery's growing success, he knew that Kevin's pressure wasn't going away. He could feel it, looming like a storm on the horizon, gathering strength with every passing day. It was a chilly Thursday morning when Ethan's quiet routine was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. He was behind the counter, pulling out trays of freshly baked bread, when the bell above the door chimed, and in walked a woman he didn't recognize. She was young, mid-20s perhaps, with sharp features and a notepad in hand, her eyes already scanning the bakery with an intensity that made him pause. "Good morning," she greeted him, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm Maya Fletcher. I'm a journalist doing a series on local businesses that have stood the test of time. I'd love to ask you a few questions about Winter Hill Bakery, if you have a moment." Ethan glanced at her with a mix of surprise and curiosity. It wasn't every day that a journalist showed up in his little corner of the world. He hesitated but finally nodded, gesturing to one of the tables near the window. "Of course. Have a seat," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Maya slid into the chair, pulling out her notepad and pen, her gaze steady as she waited for him to join her. He could tell she was the kind of person who missed nothing, her sharp eyes taking in every detail, from the worn wooden tables to the photographs on the walls. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me, Mr. Carter," she began, her tone polite but businesslike. "Winter Hill Bakery has been around for quite some time, hasn't it?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, it's been in my family for 3 generations. My grandmother started it with little more than a handful of recipes and a lot of determination. She believed that bread could bring people together, that it was more than just food. It was a way of connecting with others." Maya's pen scratched across her notepad, her eyes never leaving his face. "That's quite a legacy," she said, her tone neutral but respectful. "And I understand you've recently revived some of her original recipes, including the bread of remembrance?" Ethan felt a swell of pride. "Yes, with the help of a family friend. That bread has a lot of history in this town. People remember it from when they were kids. It's something familiar, comforting, and I think in times like these, people are looking for that." Maya nodded thoughtfully, her gaze drifting over the bakery once more. It sounds like this place is more than just a business to you. But I also understand there's been an offer to buy the property from a development company. Ethan's jaw tightened, his hands clenching briefly before he forced himself to relax. There is, he replied carefully, choosing his words. My brother, Kevin, thinks it would be more profitable to sell. He believes a shopping center would modernize the town. Maya tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. And you don't agree? Ethan's voice softened, his gaze drifting to the shelves filled with fresh bread, the photographs lining the walls, the little memories tucked into every corner. I don't. This place was built by my family for this community. It has history, roots. If we sold it, all of that would disappear. Maya's pen paused over her notepad, and she looked at him with an intensity that surprised him. So, you're fighting to keep it? Yes, he said simply, a quiet determination settling over him. I am. Maya nodded, jotting down a few more notes. Thank you, Mr. Carter. This story could help people see the value of what you're doing here. Sometimes, people need a reminder of what's really worth holding on to. Ethan watched her go, feeling a strange sense of relief. Maya's questions had stirred something in him. A reminder that his fight wasn't just about a building, but about preserving something real, something meaningful. But just as Maya's article began to take shape, things took a darker turn. A week later, Ethan was in the middle of a bustling morning, the bakery alive with the sounds of laughter and conversation, when the bell above the door rang, and in walked Kevin. He was dressed in his usual sleek suit, his expression steely, his gaze cold as he surveyed the bakery. Ethan felt his stomach tighten as he met his brother's gaze, sensing the storm that had finally arrived. Kevin, he greeted stiffly, setting down the tray of pastries he'd been arranging. Kevin's mouth was set in a hard line as he approached the counter. We need to talk, he said, his voice low and tense. Ethan led him to the back, away from the customers, and closed the door behind them. Kevin wasted no time. I hear you've been talking to a journalist, he said, his voice laced with accusation. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Yes, she's doing a story on the bakery. I thought it would be good for business. Kevin's expression grew colder. Good for business? Or just another attempt to undermine me? Ethan clenched his jaw, fighting to keep his voice steady. This has nothing to do with you, Kevin. I'm trying to save this place, not start a fight. Kevin's eyes flashed with anger. Save it? You think a feel-good story is going to change anything? The developers aren't going to wait forever, Ethan. If you don't decide soon, they'll pull out, and you'll be left with nothing but debt. Ethan felt a surge of anger. Is that what you want, Kevin? To see this place turned into another soulless building with no history, no meaning? Do you even care about what this place means to our family? Kevin's gaze flickered, a hint of something. Pain, regret, passing through his eyes before it disappeared, replaced by steely determination. I care about the future, Ethan. This bakery is dying. You're clinging to something that isn't viable anymore. It's time to move on. Ethan's hands balled into fists, his voice dropping to a low, furious whisper. You may think this place is dying, but I see something else. I see people coming together, finding comfort, sharing memories. That's worth fighting for. Kevin let out a harsh laugh, shaking his head. Fight all you want, Ethan, but you're fighting a losing battle. And when this place finally collapses, don't say, I didn't warn you. With that, Kevin turned on his heel and walked out, leaving Ethan alone in the silence of the back room, his heart pounding with a mixture of anger and sadness. He knew Kevin believed he was being realistic, that he was trying to protect them both from inevitable loss. But Ethan also knew that his brother couldn't see the value in what they had, the connection to their past, to their family, to the town. He took a deep breath, letting the anger ebb away, and reminded himself of why he was doing this. For his grandmother, for Rose, for the community that had supported them through every hardship. He wouldn't give up. Not now. But Kevin wasn't finished yet. Just a few days later, a surprise health inspection rocked the bakery. The inspector showed up unannounced, clipboard in hand, his expression grim as he examined every corner, every shelf, every inch of the kitchen. Ethan watched him, his stomach twisted in knots as he tried to stay calm. The bakery had always adhered to the necessary regulations, but with the recent influx of customers, he knew there could be small things he might have overlooked. After what felt like an eternity, the inspector finally handed him a notice. "There are some minor violations," he said, his tone professional but firm. "Nothing major, but enough to require a temporary closure until they're resolved." Ethan felt his heart sink. A closure, even a temporary one, meant lost income, uncertainty, doubt. He nodded numbly, accepting the notice, feeling a hollow ache settle in his chest. When he looked up, he saw Kevin standing across the street, watching with a smug expression. Ethan's blood boiled, his fists clenching as he watched his brother smirk and walk away, victory clear in his posture. Back inside the bakery, Ethan stood in the quiet, staring at the empty shelves, the untouched dough on the counter, the walls that had once been filled with laughter and warmth. He felt the weight of the closure settle over him like a shroud, a suffocating reminder of the battle he was up against. But even in the face of Kevin's underhanded tactics, he knew he couldn't let this be the end. This bakery was more than just a building. It was a home, a refuge, a place of memories and connection. With a renewed resolve, Ethan set to work, tackling each of the minor issues noted by the inspector. He cleaned every surface, scrubbed every corner, checked and double-checked every piece of equipment. Helen and Lucas joined him, working late into the night, their hands moving in silent determination, a testament to their shared commitment to the bakery. As they worked, they spoke quietly, their voices filling the empty space with warmth, reminding Ethan of the strength that came from community, from shared purpose. By the time they finished, the bakery was spotless, every surface gleaming, every shelf in perfect order. They stood together in the quiet, exhausted but triumphant, knowing that they had done everything they could to prepare for the reopening. On the morning of the reopening, Ethan stood at the door, his heart pounding with anticipation and a touch of anxiety. He watched as the first customers approached, their faces lighting up as they saw the familiar glow of the bakery's lights, the scent of fresh bread wafting through the air. One by one, they filed in, filling the bakery with laughter, conversation, and the comforting rhythm of daily life. Ethan felt a surge of gratitude as he greeted each customer, feeling the connection between them, the shared memories, the unspoken understanding that this place was more than just a business. And as the day wore on, as more and more people came through the door, he knew, with a certainty that nothing could shake, that this bakery was worth every battle, every sacrifice, every sleepless night. No matter what Kevin did, no matter how hard he tried to push him out, Ethan would hold on. This place, this legacy, was his to protect, and he would protect it with everything he had. By mid-afternoon on reopening day, the bakery was alive with the energy of friends, neighbors, and newcomers eager to show their support. A comforting warmth filled the space, the scent of freshly baked bread and pastries mingling with laughter and conversation, creating a sense of home and belonging. It was the kind of day Ethan had once only dreamed of bringing back to the bakery, one where people gathered not just to buy bread, but to share moments and memories. Ethan found himself in a quiet moment behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron and watching the crowd. Lucas was by the ovens, gently turning the next batch of loaves with practiced ease. Helen floated through the crowd, her soft voice blending with the customers' laughter as she chatted, connecting with old friends and making new ones. Even Lily had come by, sneaking peeks from behind her grandmother, Margaret, who watched her with the kind of pride only a grandparent could have. It was during this brief lull that Maya, the journalist, slipped through the crowd and approached Ethan with a warm smile. "Ethan," she greeted him, her notepad tucked under her arm. "I see the bakery is back in action." "It is," he replied, smiling. "Thanks in no small part to your article." Maya shook her head modestly. "I didn't do much. I just told your story. It was the town that rallied around you." She glanced around, her eyes taking in the bustling bakery with appreciation. "There's a lot of love in this place. You can see it in the way people look at you, the way they treat each other here." Ethan felt a surge of pride. It's more than just a place to them. This bakery, it's a piece of the town, a part of their memories. She nodded thoughtfully. Stories like these are rare. That's why I wanted to tell it. And speaking of stories, you wouldn't happen to know if there's more to it, would you? Maya's tone was casual, but Ethan could sense a deeper curiosity there, as if she were searching for something more. Ethan hesitated, glancing around the bakery. He knew she was likely referring to the complexities with Kevin, to the struggle over the bakery's future, perhaps even to the delicate family secrets that he'd kept closely guarded. But he wasn't ready to share those. Not yet. Right now, he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, I'm focused on keeping this place alive. Whatever happens next, well, I'll face it when the time comes. Maya studied him, then nodded, respecting his reluctance to dive deeper into his family's issues. Fair enough, she replied, her gaze softening. Sometimes it's best to let things unfold in their own time. Ethan felt a swell of relief. He appreciated her understanding and her discretion. For now, the quiet strength of the bakery's legacy was enough. And as she made her way back through the crowd, he realized he was grateful for her story, for the way she had shown the town what the bakery meant without sensationalizing it. Just when the day was beginning to wind down, Ethan glanced up and felt his heart sink. Kevin was standing outside the bakery, watching him through the window with a look that could only be described as calculating. Ethan swallowed, bracing himself for whatever his brother had planned. They hadn't spoken since the health inspection incident, but Kevin's presence on reopening day felt like a deliberate challenge. With a steadying breath, Ethan walked to the door and stepped outside. Kevin was already waiting, his hands in his coat pockets, his expression guarded. Ethan, he greeted him, his voice calm, but with an edge that set Ethan on alert. I see business is booming. It is, Ethan replied evenly, keeping his gaze level. People here care about this place. Kevin nodded, though his expression remained detached. I've been thinking about what you said, he began, a hint of something insincere in his tone. About the bakery being our family's legacy. And I understand that you have feelings about it. Ethan's jaw tightened. It's more than just feelings, Kevin. This bakery is a part of who we are. It's a place people rely on, a place with history. Kevin sighed, a hint of impatience slipping through. Ethan, you're too attached. You're letting nostalgia cloud your judgment. I came here to give you one last chance, one last opportunity to take the developer's offer and make a clean break. Ethan felt his hands clench at his sides. And if I say no? Kevin's gaze hardened. Then you'll face the consequences. Consequences? Ethan repeated, feeling his temper rise. What consequences, Kevin? Are you threatening me? Kevin shrugged, his face unreadable. I'm being realistic. You don't have the resources to keep this place afloat indefinitely. And when the bills start piling up, you'll have no choice but to reconsider. Ethan's anger flared, but he fought to keep his voice calm. I'm not selling, Kevin. Not now, not ever. This place means more to me than money. Kevin's face twisted in frustration, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw a flash of something deeper, something like jealousy or regret. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Fine, Kevin snapped. Keep it, but don't expect me to stand by and watch you ruin yourself. When this place falls apart, don't come running to me. And with that, he turned on his heel, stalking off down the street, leaving Ethan alone in the cool evening air, his heart pounding with anger and defiance. Inside, the bakery's warmth felt like a balm as Ethan returned, forcing himself to shake off the anger that lingered from his exchange with Kevin. He saw Helen watching him from behind the counter, her eyes filled with quiet understanding. He won't stop, will he? She asked gently, offering him a mug of warm tea. Ethan shook his head, accepting the mug with a grateful nod. No, he's made up his mind, and he thinks he's right. But I'm not going to let him take this place. Not while I can still fight for it. Helen's face softened, her hand resting reassuringly on his shoulder. You're doing the right thing, Ethan. I believe that. And I think the town does too. Her words gave him a renewed sense of strength, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this fight. Whatever Kevin did next, whatever threats or challenges came his way, he knew he could stand firm. This bakery, this legacy, was worth every battle. The following week, the bakery continued to thrive, with more and more customers showing up, drawn by the bread of remembrance and the warm, welcoming atmosphere. Ethan poured himself into his work, finding a steady rhythm in the daily tasks, a quiet satisfaction in each loaf, each pastry. But one day, as he was closing up for the night, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. Taped to the bakery's front door was an official notice, a summons to appear in court. The developers had filed a formal petition, claiming that the bakery was a hindrance to their plans for town modernization. Ethan tore the notice off the door, his hands shaking as he read the details. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks from now, giving him barely enough time to prepare. As he read through the summons, he felt a surge of fear, a sense of powerlessness in the face of something so large, so official. He had known Kevin would push back, but this was a tactic he hadn't anticipated. The developers were playing hardball, using legal pressure to force his hand. Helen found him a few moments later, her expression filled with concern as she read the notice. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, her voice calm but steady. "We'll fight this, Ethan. This is just another tactic. Don't let it shake you." Ethan looked at her, a fierce determination settling in his eyes. "I'm not going to let them scare me off. This place has survived wars, recessions, and more. We'll survive this too." With Helen's support and the community behind him, Ethan knew he had no choice but to stand his ground. He would find a way to defend the bakery, to protect the place that had given him a purpose, a home, a legacy. As the court date approached, word of the lawsuit spread through Winter Hill, stirring up both outrage and support. Maya, the journalist, published a follow-up story, sharing the bakery's struggle to remain independent in the face of corporate pressure. The story rallied the town, bringing more people to Ethan's side, united in their determination to save a piece of their history. Ethan spent the days leading up to the hearing preparing his case, gathering testimonials from loyal customers, documents from the town's archives proving the bakery's historical significance, and anything that might support his right to keep his family's business intact. The night before the hearing, Ethan gathered with Helen, Lucas, Margaret, and a few other friends at the bakery. They sat together, sharing stories, reminiscing about the bakery's early days, about the people it had touched, the lives it had helped. As the evening wore on, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle over him, a quiet strength that came from knowing he wasn't alone. He looked around at the faces of his friends, his community, and knew that no matter what happened in that courtroom, he had already won something far greater than a legal battle. He had found his family, his purpose, his place in the world. The day of the hearing arrived, cold and gray, with a light drizzle falling as Ethan made his way to the courthouse. His friends and supporters filled the gallery, their faces a reassuring presence as he faced the developer's sleek, polished lawyers, their arguments sharp and unyielding. But Ethan stood his ground, speaking from the heart about his family's history, the bakery's importance to the town, the memories it held for so many people. He spoke of his grandmother's dream, of the people who had relied on this bakery, of the legacy he was determined to protect. When he finished, there was a hush in the courtroom, a silence that held the weight of his words. And as the judge deliberated, as the minutes stretched into hours, Ethan felt a quiet hope take root in his heart. The judge's gavel fell with a sound that echoed through the silent courtroom, a final, resounding decision. After reviewing the evidence, the judge began, his voice firm but impartial. "It is clear that Winter Hill Bakery holds significant cultural and historical value to the town. While the developers have made a compelling case for modernization, it is also evident that the community's sentiments, values, and heritage deserve protection." Ethan sat in breathless anticipation, his fingers clenched tightly on the edge of his seat. "It is therefore this court's decision," the judge continued, "that Winter Hill Bakery will be granted landmark status, prohibiting any forced acquisition or destruction of the property. This ruling acknowledges the importance of local history and community integrity." A collective sigh swept through the gallery, quickly replaced by murmurs of relief and joy. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the weight of the decision sink in, feeling an overwhelming mixture of gratitude, disbelief, and pride. He'd won. He'd saved the bakery. As he rose to leave, he was met with a rush of friends and supporters who congratulated him with heartfelt words and warm hugs. Helen, her eyes glistening with pride, pulled him into a tight embrace. "You did it, Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved it." Ethan could only nod, his throat tight with unspoken gratitude. He was surrounded by love, by the people who had stood by him through the darkest days. And in that moment, he knew that the bakery had become more than just his family's legacy. It was a living testament to the power of community and resilience. The victory was a turning point. Word of the court's decision spread quickly through Winter Hill, and the bakery became a symbol of the town's strength and history. More people visited than ever before, drawn not just by the bread of remembrance, but by the story of the bakery's fight. People from neighboring towns came to see the little bakery that had defied the odds, that had stood up against the corporate machine and come out victorious. Ethan poured himself into the bakery with renewed vigor. Each day brought new challenges, but now he faced them with a sense of purpose, knowing that every loaf he baked, every pastry he shaped, was part of something larger than himself. He could feel his grandmother's legacy guiding him, her quiet strength infusing his every action. Maya continued to cover the story, publishing articles that brought the bakery even more recognition. And with each piece she wrote, the bakery's reputation grew. Small business owners reached out to Ethan, thanking him for inspiring them, for standing up for what he believed in. For the first time, he felt he was making a difference beyond the walls of Winter Hill Bakery. But even as the bakery flourished, there was one person who remained conspicuously absent: Kevin. It was a quiet afternoon when Kevin finally showed up. The bakery had just closed for the day, and Ethan was wiping down the counters when he heard the familiar chime of the doorbell. He looked up, heart tightening as he saw his brother standing in the doorway, his face shadowed with something Ethan couldn't quite read. "Kevin," he greeted, his tone guarded. He didn't know what to expect. Their last encounter had been tense, full of accusations and ultimatums. But this time, Kevin's expression was different, softer, perhaps, though his shoulders were still squared with his usual pride. "Ethan," Kevin replied, stepping inside, his gaze wandering over the bakery's interior. He hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "I heard about the ruling. Congratulations." Ethan nodded, watching his brother carefully. "Thanks. I wasn't sure you'd be pleased to hear it." Kevin looked down, the faintest hint of regret crossing his face. "I came here to talk, to explain a few things." Ethan folded his arms, keeping his expression neutral. "I'm listening." Kevin drew in a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the floor. "When Dad passed, he left me with a lot of debt. Business school wasn't cheap, and I couldn't handle it all on my own. Selling the bakery seemed like the logical way to get back on track. I thought if I could convince you to sell, I'd be able to take care of things." Ethan felt his anger soften slightly, replaced by a flicker of understanding. He hadn't known about the debt or the weight Kevin had been carrying. But even so, the way Kevin had gone about it, the pressure, the manipulation, had caused a rift between them that couldn't be ignored. "Why didn't you just tell me?" Ethan asked quietly. "Why not ask for help instead of pushing me to give up everything?" Kevin's mouth tightened. "Pride, I guess. I didn't want to admit I couldn't handle it. You've always been the one with roots. You were always so close to Grandma, so attached to this place. I thought if I could just show you the benefits of moving on, it would solve both our problems." Ethan sighed, a heaviness settling over him. "Kevin, this place isn't just about the past. It's about the people here, the community. I'm sorry you felt you couldn't come to me, but selling the bakery was never the answer." Kevin nodded slowly, a faint look of regret in his eyes. "I see that now. I've been so focused on my own issues that I lost sight of what this place means to you and to everyone else." There was a long pause, filled with the unspoken weight of their shared history, of all the years and memories that had brought them to this moment. "Look," Ethan said finally, his voice steady. "I can't pretend what you did didn't hurt. But if you're willing to be a part of this, to support what we're building here, maybe we can find a way forward." Kevin's gaze lifted, his expression softening with something close to hope. "You let me help?" Ethan managed a small smile. "This bakery was meant to be shared, wasn't it? And I think Grandma would want us to find a way to make it work, together." For the first time in years, Kevin's face broke into a genuine smile, a glimmer of relief in his eyes. And as he took his place beside Ethan behind the counter, there was a sense of healing, of reconciliation, that neither of them had thought possible. In the weeks that followed, Kevin became a regular fixture at the bakery. At first, his awkwardness around the customers was obvious, but slowly, he learned to appreciate the warmth and camaraderie that filled the bakery each day. He began to take an interest in the baking, asking Ethan about recipes and even attempting a few simple pastries himself under Helen's watchful eye. Their relationship wasn't without tension. Old habits and unresolved feelings didn't vanish overnight. But there was a newfound respect between them, a sense of understanding that made the small arguments and disagreements easier to bear. Slowly, they began to rebuild not just the bakery, but their bond as brothers. Meanwhile, Ethan felt his life settling into a steady, fulfilling rhythm. The bakery had become more than a job. It was a purpose, a calling. Each morning, he greeted familiar faces, heard the stories of the town, and felt the quiet joy of being part of something greater than himself. Maya's articles continued to bring new visitors to the bakery, and Ethan saw people from towns and cities he'd never heard of, all drawn to Winter Hill by the bakery's story. And through it all, the bread of remembrance became a symbol not just of his family's history, but of the community's resilience, of the power of love and tradition. On a bright spring morning, Ethan stood by the oven, pulling out a tray of fresh bread, the golden loaves filling the air with their rich, comforting aroma. Lily had joined him that day, carefully placing loaves into the display case under Margaret's proud supervision. Ethan watched her work, his heart swelling with gratitude for the unexpected connections he'd found along the way. Kevin joined him a few moments later, glancing over the bustling bakery with a faint smile. "Looks like we're finally where we're supposed to be," he murmured, his voice softened by a rare warmth. Ethan nodded, his gaze sweeping over the bakery, taking in the laughter, the familiar faces, the sense of belonging that filled the air. Ethan looked over at Kevin, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. Their journey back to this place, to a shared understanding, had been difficult. But now, as they stood side by side in the bakery, he felt the tension between them soften, replaced by the beginnings of something real, a partnership, maybe even friendship. As the morning passed, customers filled the bakery, bringing a steady hum of laughter and conversation. Margaret and Helen served fresh loaves with practiced grace, their voices weaving together like an old, familiar song. And amidst the bustle, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace, of belonging, as if all the pieces had finally come together. Just as the crowd began to thin, the door opened, and Maya stepped inside, her notepad in hand, her eyes bright with excitement. "Ethan, Kevin," she greeted, smiling as she approached. "I wanted to stop by to share some news." Ethan raised his eyebrows, gesturing for her to sit down. "Good news, I hope?" "Very good news," Maya replied, her smile widening. "The articles I wrote about Winter Hill Bakery have been picked up by a national publication. They're planning a feature on community-driven businesses, and they want to include the bakery's story as the centerpiece." The announcement was met with a stunned silence. Ethan glanced at Kevin, who looked equally surprised, and then back at Maya, his heart pounding with disbelief. "National?" he repeated, hardly daring to believe it. "You mean people from all over?" Maya nodded. "Yes. They loved the story of how you brought this place back to life, and how the community rallied around you. It's exactly the kind of story people need right now. A reminder of the power of family, community, and resilience." Ethan felt a mixture of gratitude and excitement rise within him. He had never imagined that the bakery story would reach beyond Winter Hill, let alone touch people in other parts of the country. The thought of sharing his family's legacy, of bringing a little piece of Winter Hill's warmth to the rest of the world, filled him with a quiet pride. "This is incredible," he murmured, glancing around the bakery. "I can't thank you enough, Maya. You've done so much for us." Maya smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. "I didn't do anything you wouldn't have done yourself. This bakery, this story, it's all you, Ethan. I just had the privilege of telling it." Kevin cleared his throat, drawing their attention. He looked at Ethan with a rare look of admiration, a faint smile breaking through his usual stoic expression. "I guess you were right," Kevin said quietly. "This place, it's more than just a business." Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of relief at Kevin's words. For the first time, he felt that his brother truly understood the depth of his love for the bakery, for the people who walked through its doors each day. Maya lingered for a while, taking notes and chatting with the customers who filtered in and out, gathering details to weave into the national feature. As she worked, the atmosphere in the bakery took on a celebratory feel, a quiet but palpable joy that seemed to fill every corner. As the afternoon wore on, Margaret joined Ethan and Kevin behind the counter, her face glowing with pride as she watched the bakery hum with life. "Your grandmother would be so proud, Ethan," she said, her voice soft with emotion. "She always dreamed of this place being something special, something that would live on long after she was gone. And you've done it." Ethan felt his throat tighten, the weight of her words settling over him like a warm blanket. His grandmother's dream, her legacy, had found a way to endure through him, through the bakery, through every loaf of bread they baked. "Thank you, Margaret," he replied, his voice thick with gratitude. "This place wouldn't be what it is without people like you. You and Helen. You've kept her spirit alive in more ways than I ever could have alone." Margaret squeezed his hand, her eyes filled with understanding. "Non fewesse duice aloni, ita." That's what community is about. And now, with you and Kevin here, the bakery will have the strength it needs for generations to come. Kevin nodded, his gaze thoughtful. Maybe this is exactly where we were meant to be, together. In the days that followed, the bakery became busier than ever, with customers from nearby towns stopping by to see the place they'd read about in Maya's articles. Ethan worked tirelessly, finding a renewed energy in every task, every loaf. And Kevin, once hesitant and skeptical, began to take on more responsibilities, learning the rhythms of the bakery, discovering a sense of purpose that he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Then, on a quiet evening, when the bakery was finally empty, Kevin approached Ethan with an idea. "I've been thinking," he began, a hint of excitement in his voice. "What if we expanded a little? Nothing drastic, just a few additional items. Maybe a small cafe area, a few more seats, somewhere people can stay, enjoy the atmosphere. It could give people more time to connect with each other here." Ethan considered the idea, feeling a surge of pride in Kevin's suggestion. "You think we can make it work?" Kevin nodded. "I think we can. People love this place for the same reasons you do. It's more than a business. It's a gathering place, a part of their lives. A cafe area could give them another reason to stay a little longer, to share more moments." Ethan smiled, feeling a spark of excitement. The idea of adding a small cafe was something he'd never considered. But as he imagined people gathering around tables, sharing stories over coffee and pastries, he knew it was a perfect addition to the bakery's purpose. "Let's do it," he said, extending a hand. Kevin shook it, a look of mutual respect and shared vision passing between them. Over the next few months, they set to work on transforming a small corner of the bakery into a cozy cafe area. With Helen's guidance and Margaret's input, they chose warm, inviting decor, filled the shelves with an assortment of baked goods, and set out small tables adorned with flowers and candles. When the cafe area finally opened, it became an instant success. Customers lingered longer, sharing conversations over fresh pastries and cups of steaming coffee. It wasn't just a place to buy bread. It had become a place to make memories. Ethan found himself overwhelmed by the response. He watched as friends reconnected over shared meals, as families gathered for simple, meaningful moments. The bakery had become a beacon of warmth and community, a place where everyone was welcome, where everyone belonged. And through it all, he felt his grandmother's presence, her spirit woven into every corner of the bakery, every loaf of bread, every smile shared over coffee. She had dreamed of this, a place that wasn't just for profit, but for people, a place that brought love and comfort to all who entered. One evening, as the day wound down and the last few customers said their goodbyes, Ethan, Kevin, Helen, and Margaret sat together in the new cafe area, basking in the warm glow of the dim lights. The bakery was quiet now, but it was a peaceful quiet, a silence filled with the contentment of a day well spent. Margaret raised her coffee mug in a quiet toast, her gaze moving from one face to the next. "To family," she said softly. to community, and to the strength that binds us all together. They clinked their mugs, a shared look of understanding passing between them. As Ethan looked around at the people who had become his family, his community, he felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond words. He had saved the bakery, yes, but he had gained something far greater: connection, belonging, a sense of purpose that would guide him for the rest of his life. And in that moment, he knew that no matter what the future held, Winter Hill Bakery would endure. It would stand as a testament to love, resilience, and the quiet power of people who believed in something greater than themselves. As the weeks turned into months, the bakery continued to thrive, its reputation growing beyond Winter Hill. People traveled from miles away to visit, to taste the bread of remembrance, to experience the warmth of a place that had become a symbol of hope and heritage. And through it all, Ethan and Kevin worked side by side, their bond deepening with each passing day. They had found their way back to each other, had learned to balance their differences with a shared vision for the bakery. They had become partners, friends, brothers once more. Winter faded into spring, and the town blossomed with new life. The bakery remained at the heart of it all, a place of gathering, a place of laughter and memories, a place that embodied the spirit of Winter Hill. As Ethan stood at the counter one morning, watching the sunrise cast a golden glow over the bakery, he felt a deep sense of peace. This was where he belonged. This was his purpose. And as the first customers began to arrive, greeted by the familiar scent of fresh bread and the warm smiles of friends, Ethan knew that he had found his forever home, a place where dreams were made, where love endured, and where every loaf was a testament to the beauty of family, community, and the quiet, enduring power of hope. With the cafe corner bustling every morning and a steady stream of locals and visitors alike, Winter Hill Bakery had become a centerpiece of the town's quiet revival. Each day, Ethan marveled at how the bakery had grown, not just in success, but in its role as a hub of warmth and connection. People came not only for the bread of remembrance, but for the comfort of familiar faces and the joy of shared conversations. The new cafe area felt like an extension of Ethan's heart, a part of his family's legacy that had taken on a life of its own. He felt a new sense of purpose, knowing that his grandmother's dream was alive and thriving in ways he had never imagined. One warm autumn afternoon, as the leaves outside the bakery turned vibrant shades of amber and crimson, Ethan gathered his team in the cafe area. Kevin, Helen, Margaret, and even young Lily were there, a small but close-knit group that had come to mean everything to him. "I wanted to talk to all of you," Ethan began, clearing his throat as he looked around. "About the future. As we've been growing, I've been thinking we've built something amazing here. I want to make sure we keep it that way, not just for us, but for the town." The others nodded, their expressions eager and supportive. Ethan continued, "I'd like us to start something special, a community project that goes beyond just what we do here in the bakery. We've talked about how bread can bring people together, and I think there's more we can do." Helen leaned forward, her eyes alight with interest. "What did you have in mind, Ethan?" Ethan smiled, excitement bubbling up as he spoke. "I was thinking we could use a portion of our profits to fund a program for young people in town. They could learn the basics of baking, but more than that, they could learn about dedication, hard work, and being part of something bigger than themselves." Kevin's face lit up, a genuine smile breaking through as he nodded in agreement. "I love it. It would give them a sense of belonging and purpose, just like this place has given us." Lily's eyes widened with excitement. "Does that mean I could help teach them too?" she asked eagerly, glancing from Ethan to Margaret. Margaret chuckled, patting her granddaughter's hand. "I think you'd make a wonderful teacher, Lily." They laughed together, but Ethan's heart swelled with pride. He saw in Lily the next generation, a girl who had once come into the bakery hungry and uncertain, but was now confident, full of dreams and hopes of her own. Lily embodied everything he wanted for the young people who would be part of their program: a chance to learn, to feel valued, and to give back to the community. "So it's settled then?" Helen asked, her voice warm with encouragement. "We'll start the program?" Ethan nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude as he looked at each of them. "Yes, we'll call it the Bread of Tomorrow. The name resonated deeply with all of them, a promise to keep the bakery's legacy alive by helping to shape the future. As they toasted to the new program with cups of tea and freshly baked pastries, Ethan felt a profound sense of purpose, of continuity. He knew that, just as his grandmother had passed her love of baking on to him, he was now passing that same love on to others. With the Bread of Tomorrow set to launch, word quickly spread through Winter Hill, and interest in the program grew beyond anything Ethan had expected. Parents brought their children to enroll, teachers volunteered to help spread the word, and local business owners offered to donate supplies. Ethan was amazed at the community's enthusiasm. The bakery had always been about more than just bread, but now it was becoming a place of learning, of growth, a space where young people could come and feel a sense of pride and purpose. Ethan was overwhelmed by the response, touched by how deeply the town embraced the program as an extension of the bakery's legacy. Maya visited again, her notepad in hand and her face glowing with excitement as she documented the launch of the program. "This is incredible, Ethan," she said as she watched the kids roll up their sleeves, working alongside Helen and Lily to shape their first loaves of bread. "You've turned this place into something bigger than I think even your grandmother could have imagined." Ethan watched the kids laugh and chat as they kneaded dough, the same way he had learned under his grandmother's patient guidance. He felt his heart swell, knowing that they, too, were making memories that would stay with them for a lifetime. "I think she'd be proud," he replied softly, feeling the weight of her words. This is exactly what she wanted, a place where people feel connected like family, a place where anyone can belong. Maya smiled, snapping a few photos for her article. "I'm sure she would be, and I have a feeling the world will be hearing about this place for a long time to come." As the months went on, the Bread of Tomorrow blossomed into something far greater than Ethan had ever envisioned. The program drew families, teachers, and volunteers from surrounding towns. And with each new session, Ethan saw how much the bakery had become a place of learning and love, of laughter and growth. Kevin continued to work alongside him, taking on new responsibilities with an enthusiasm that surprised even him. Where once he had been focused solely on profit, Kevin now saw the beauty in the bakery's mission, in the community's support. And in those moments, Ethan felt closer to his brother than he had since they were boys, a bond rekindled by shared purpose and understanding. One evening, as they cleaned up the bakery together, Kevin paused, a look of contemplation in his eyes. "You know," he began quietly, "I never understood why this place meant so much to you. I thought it was just nostalgia. But now, after seeing what you've built here, I get it." Ethan looked at his brother, his own eyes filled with gratitude. "I'm glad you stayed, Kevin. I couldn't have done this without you." Kevin smiled, clapping a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "No, little brother, this was all you. I was just lucky enough to be part of it." As autumn turned to winter, Winter Hill Bakery continued to thrive, now a place of learning and connection, a landmark in both spirit and name. Ethan and Kevin's relationship deepened, and together they carried on their grandmother's dream with a renewed sense of pride and unity. The bakery had become more than just a business. It was a part of the town's very soul. And then, one snowy December morning, a surprise arrived in the mail. Ethan opened the envelope with a mixture of curiosity and excitement, finding an official letter from a national foundation that awarded grants to historic businesses making a positive impact in their communities. As he read the letter, his eyes widened with disbelief. The foundation had awarded Winter Hill Bakery a substantial grant, recognizing its contribution to the town and its dedication to preserving history and fostering community. Kevin read over his shoulder, his face breaking into a grin. "Ethan, do you realize what this means? This grant could help us expand the program, maybe even renovate parts of the bakery." Ethan nodded, his heart pounding with excitement. The grant was a gift beyond his wildest dreams, a way to ensure the bakery's future, to honor his grandmother's legacy, and to secure the impact of the Bread of Tomorrow for years to come. Together, they called Helen, Margaret, and Lily to share the news, the bakery filling with cheers and laughter as they celebrated the grant that would help them continue their mission. It was a moment of triumph, of joy, of shared purpose that transcended words. That evening, As the snow fell gently outside, Ethan sat by the window, watching the flakes drift softly to the ground. He felt a peace he had never known, a quiet certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. His family's legacy had come full circle, not just as a business, but as a cornerstone of the community, a place that held the town's memories and dreams. And as he looked around at his friends, his family, his town, he knew that Winter Hill Bakery would continue to thrive, its warmth and love passed down through every loaf, every lesson, every shared moment. This was his home, his purpose, his life. For generations to come, Winter Hill Bakery would stand as a testament to the power of love, tradition, and community, a place where dreams were baked fresh each day, where the past met the future, and where the bread of remembrance, of tomorrow, would nourish hearts and souls for as long as the town itself stood. The following weeks were a flurry of excitement as the bakery prepared to put the grant to good use. Ethan and Kevin sat down with Helen, Margaret, and a few other community members to discuss how best to expand the bread of tomorrow and make necessary updates to the bakery. Each suggestion they received, from upgrading kitchen equipment to adding more seating in the cafe area, felt like another piece of the dream coming together. As they planned, Ethan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of accomplishment. This little bakery, which had once teetered on the edge of closure, had become a beacon of hope and progress, fueled by the love and loyalty of Winter Hill. And now, with the grant, they would be able to ensure that this beacon continued to shine for generations. The grant funds allowed them to make several key improvements. First, they expanded the kitchen space, adding modern ovens and storage that would support larger baking projects. They created a small classroom in the back, complete with sturdy tables and shelves lined with baking ingredients and tools for the students. They also expanded the cafe area, adding cozy booths along the windows and hanging local art on the walls, making the bakery feel even more like the heart of Winter Hill. As they worked on renovations, Maya returned with her camera crew to document the changes. Her feature article had sparked such positive attention that a national news station wanted to highlight Winter Hill Bakery in a special series on historic small businesses. At first, the idea of television cameras and interviews made Ethan anxious, but Maya assured him that it would help raise awareness of the bakery's mission. The day of the filming arrived, and the bakery was filled with both nervous energy and excitement. The crew set up cameras, capturing shots of the ovens blazing, the golden loaves on display, and Ethan and his team working together in their element. Helen demonstrated her signature techniques for the bread of remembrance, while Kevin spoke to the reporters about the journey that had brought them here. Even Lily had her moment in front of the camera, shyly but proudly explaining how the program had inspired her to become a baker. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he took a deep breath, looking into the camera with steady eyes. "This bakery isn't just about bread," he began, choosing his words carefully. "It's about people. It's about preserving our heritage and creating a space where everyone feels welcome. My grandmother taught me that bread has a way of bringing people together, of filling hearts as well as stomachs. That's why we're here, to carry on that legacy, one loaf at a time." The crew captured the warmth and camaraderie that had come to define the bakery, and when they left, the team celebrated, grateful that their story would reach people far beyond Winter Hill. As winter deepened, the bakery became a gathering place, not just for townsfolk, but for visitors drawn by the bakery's story. The Bread of Tomorrow program blossomed, and each week, a new batch of eager young bakers joined the classes, their laughter and enthusiasm adding a vibrant energy to the bakery. One evening, just as they were closing up, a group of parents approached Ethan and Kevin with an idea. They proposed creating a mentorship program that would allow older students in the baking program to help teach the younger kids, passing down what they'd learned and fostering a sense of responsibility and leadership. Ethan was deeply moved by the suggestion. Not only would the mentorship program build community bonds, but it would also allow the Bread of Tomorrow to sustain itself and continue growing. He could already imagine Lily as one of the mentors, guiding younger students just as she had once been guided. Over the following weeks, the mentorship program took shape, and the students responded with enthusiasm, each eager to take on a bigger role in the bakery. Ethan watched with pride as the older students taught the younger ones, their hands moving confidently over the dough, their faces alight with focus and joy. Through it all, Kevin became an integral part of the program, overseeing logistics and even coordinating with other small businesses in the area to arrange internships for students who wanted to continue their culinary education. His transformation from a skeptical outsider to a dedicated member of the bakery's mission filled Ethan with gratitude and respect. On a crisp spring morning, the bakery celebrated its one-year anniversary of the Bread of Tomorrow with an open house. People from across town and beyond came to enjoy the festivities. Tables were set up with samples of the bakery's classic breads and pastries, and the students proudly served their own creations, explaining to guests the techniques they'd learned and the pride they felt in being part of the program. At the center of the bakery, a large table held a guest book for visitors to sign. Page after page filled up with heartfelt messages from townsfolk, visitors, and former students, each one sharing a personal memory or message of gratitude for Winter Hill Bakery. Ethan read each message with a full heart, the outpouring of love and appreciation leaving him humbled and inspired. As the celebration wound down, Helen gathered everyone for a toast, raising a glass filled with sparkling apple cider. To Ethan, Kevin, and this wonderful bakery, she began, her voice thick with emotion. To everyone who has worked to keep this place alive, who believed in it even when times were tough. You've created something truly special, a place where people feel at home and where our town's legacy lives on. And I know, deep in my heart, that Winter Hill Bakery will continue to be a source of joy and inspiration for generations. Everyone raised their glasses, clinking them together as cheers filled the air. Ethan stood with a smile that he couldn't contain, overcome by the realization of just how far they had come. Later that night, when the bakery was finally empty and quiet, Ethan and Kevin lingered, reflecting on the day's events. The warm glow of the bakery's lights filled the room, casting long shadows that reminded Ethan of late nights spent baking alongside his grandmother. "Did you ever imagine this?" Kevin asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Ethan shook his head, a smile of disbelief crossing his face. "No, I always dreamed of keeping the bakery alive, but this is more than I could have ever hoped for." Kevin nodded thoughtfully, his gaze softening as he looked around the bakery. "I'm glad I stayed, Ethan. I know I fought you at first, but I get it now. This place is special, and I'm proud to be a part of it." Ethan clapped his brother on the shoulder, gratitude filling his heart. "I couldn't have done it without you, Kevin. We made this happen together." They stood in quiet camaraderie, the bond between them stronger than it had ever been. The hardships, the disagreements, the struggle to protect the bakery, all of it had led them to this moment, a moment of peace, of fulfillment, of shared purpose. The following year brought new challenges and triumphs as the bakery continued to grow. They expanded their offerings, experimenting with recipes that blended tradition with a modern twist, each one becoming an instant favorite with the customers. The Bread of Tomorrow program gained even more recognition, with schools and community centers reaching out to collaborate, eager to share in the bakery's mission. And through it all, Ethan never lost sight of his grandmother's legacy. Each morning, he walked through the bakery, remembering her words, her wisdom, her unwavering belief in the power of love and community. She had taught him that bread was more than just food. It was a way to connect, to build, to nourish not just bodies but hearts. One afternoon, as he rolled out dough beside Lily, he noticed the same spark in her eyes that he'd once felt as a child learning at his grandmother's side. "Lily," he said with a smile, "do you think you'll keep baking, even when you're grown up?" Lily looked up at him, her face glowing with confidence. "I think so. I love this place. It feels like home." Ethan nodded, feeling a familiar warmth settle in his heart. "Then you're already part of the bakery's legacy. And one day, it'll be yours to carry on." They worked in silence, the rhythm of baking connecting them in a way that words couldn't capture. Ethan knew that the bakery would continue to thrive, to grow, to inspire, carried forward by the hands and hearts of those who had come to love it. As the seasons changed and Winter Hill bustled with new life, Winter Hill Bakery remained at its heart, a timeless reminder of family, heritage, and resilience. Through every loaf, every lesson, and every shared moment, the bakery wove itself into the lives of all who came through its doors. And as Ethan stood by the oven one quiet morning, watching the sun rise over the town, he knew with absolute certainty that his grandmother's dream had been fulfilled and that her legacy would endure for generations, a legacy of love, hope, and the enduring power of community. Winter Hill Bakery had become more than Ethan could have ever envisioned. The bakery was bustling, its kitchen alive with the energy of apprentices, seasoned bakers, and customers who felt like family. Each morning, the scent of fresh bread and pastries drifted through the air, drawing in a growing number of patrons from all over. As the Bread of Tomorrow program matured, Ethan saw students flourish, mastering the art of baking and taking pride in their work. Some of the young bakers moved on to start their own ventures, creating small businesses that brought fresh ideas and a renewed spirit to Winter Hill. Others returned to volunteer at the bakery, sharing what they had learned and helping the next generation discover the joy of baking. With Kevin by his side, Ethan marveled at how their grandmother's legacy had become an anchor for the town, a place where the past met the future and hope was baked fresh each day. One Saturday morning, Ethan found himself watching the familiar bustle of the bakery from the cafe corner, sipping his coffee with a deep sense of fulfillment. The front door opened, and Maya walked in with her notepad in hand, her smile warm and familiar. "Ethan, the bakery looks more alive than ever," she said, joining him at the table. "How are you feeling about everything? It's been a few years since the first article, and it seems like Winter Hill Bakery has grown into something amazing." Ethan smiled, glancing around at the thriving business and the joyful faces of his customers. "I can hardly believe it sometimes," he admitted. "It started as a simple dream to keep the bakery alive, and now it's become a home for so many people." Maya nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "And you've done something remarkable here, Ethan. This bakery has become a cornerstone of the town, a place people look to for inspiration, connection, and, of course, delicious bread. It's exactly what the world needs right now." As they talked, Ethan shared the developments that had transformed the bakery over the years. The expanded Bread of Tomorrow program, the mentorships, the partnerships with other local businesses, and the community events that had brought people together in new and meaningful ways. He felt a sense of pride in everything they'd accomplished, knowing that it wasn't just his work, but the work of everyone who had poured their heart into Winter Hill Bakery. A few months later, with Maya's encouragement, Ethan decided to organize the bakery's first-ever community festival. The event, called Harvest of Hope, would celebrate the town's rich heritage, the bakery's impact, and the spirit of togetherness that had carried them through tough times. The town square was transformed into a vibrant festival ground, with stalls selling homemade crafts, food trucks offering local specialties, and a large outdoor oven where Ethan and his apprentices demonstrated the art of making bread. Helen and Margaret coordinated tables laden with pastries, fresh loaves, and the bakery's famed bread of remembrance, all offered as a tribute to Winter Hill's history and resilience. As the day unfolded, families wandered the festival grounds, sampling treats and watching the baking demonstrations with fascination. Children ran through the rows of tables, their faces sticky with frosting and powdered sugar. The warm, inviting atmosphere was exactly what Ethan had hoped for, a celebration of everything the bakery stood for and a chance to give back to the community that had supported them. Late in the afternoon, as the festival reached its peak, Kevin took the stage, clearing his throat to quiet the crowd. He looked out over the sea of faces, a look of pride and gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady. "When Ethan and I took over this bakery, we never imagined it would grow into something so meaningful, so alive. But thanks to each and every one of you, Winter Hill Bakery has become a place where people come not only for bread, but for a sense of family, for connection." Kevin's gaze shifted to Ethan, who was watching from the side of the stage, his eyes filled with emotion. "And none of this would be possible without my brother," Kevin continued, his voice softening. "Ethan's heart and dedication have been the guiding force behind this place. and it's his vision that has made the bakery a symbol of hope for all of us. The crowd broke into applause, and Ethan felt a swell of pride as he stepped onto the stage, standing shoulder to shoulder with his brother. As they looked out over the crowd, friends, family, strangers, and students whose lives had been touched by the bakery, Ethan felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey they had traveled together. When the applause quieted, Ethan cleared his throat, a smile breaking across his face. This bakery has always been about more than just bread. It's about carrying forward the values my grandmother taught me: hard work, kindness, and love. It's about giving back to the community that raised us and remembering where we come from. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the town square, Ethan held up a loaf of the bread of remembrance. "I want to thank each of you for making this bakery what it is," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I hope that for as long as we're here, we'll continue to grow together, to learn together, and to make Winter Hill a place where everyone feels they belong." As evening settled in and the festival wrapped up, Ethan, Kevin, Helen, Margaret, and Lily gathered back at the bakery. They were tired, their voices hoarse from the day's events, but the atmosphere was filled with a quiet joy. Margaret looked around at each of them, her eyes misty with pride. "This is what I always dreamed of," she said softly. "Your grandmother would be so proud, Ethan. She'd be proud of all of you." Lily, now a young woman who had grown up in the bakery, smiled, her gaze full of determination. "And we'll keep it going, won't we, Ethan?" she said. "We'll keep the bakery alive for the next generation and the one after that." Ethan nodded, his heart full. "Yes, Lily, we'll keep it alive, together." As the years passed, Winter Hill Bakery continued to thrive, a timeless fixture in the town. The Bread of Tomorrow program became a beloved tradition, with young bakers from all over coming to learn and grow, finding purpose and passion in the art of baking. Lily eventually took on a leadership role, guiding the next wave of apprentices with the same warmth and dedication Ethan had shown her. Kevin remained by Ethan's side, handling the business side of things while fostering partnerships with local businesses, ensuring that the bakery remained connected to the community. Together, they expanded their mission, launching initiatives that supported other small businesses, funded scholarships for aspiring bakers, and even created a nonprofit that brought the magic of baking to underprivileged kids in the city. And through it all, Winter Hill Bakery remained a place of connection, of memories, of legacy. A place where people came not just to buy bread, but to share a piece of their lives, to celebrate milestones, and to feel part of something greater. On a quiet morning many years later, Ethan stood outside the bakery, now in his 60s, watching the sunrise paint the town in shades of gold and amber. The bakery was as lively as ever, bustling with new faces, the walls adorned with photos and memories from over the years. Lily was inside, leading the morning's first baking class, her laughter ringing through the open door. She had become the heart of the bakery, bringing the same warmth and love that Ethan had poured into it for decades. And as he watched her, Ethan felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the bakery was in good hands, its future as bright as the rising sun. With a satisfied smile, he turned to go inside, ready for another day of hard work, laughter, and love. Winter Hill Bakery, his grandmother's dream, his family's legacy, would carry on, through the hands of those who had learned its secrets, through the hearts of those who cherished its warmth, and through the lives it had touched in ways he could have never imagined. Winter Hill Bakery was more than a place. It was a legacy of love, hope, and resilience, a legacy that would endure for generations to come, nourishing the hearts and souls of all who walked through its doors. On that brisk autumn morning, Ethan was filled with a quiet joy as he walked through the familiar aisles of the bakery, feeling the warmth from the ovens radiate outward. The years had softened him in some ways, adding lines around his eyes, but his heart felt fuller than ever, brimming with memories and pride. Winter Hill Bakery had become an enduring symbol in the town, a place where tradition met progress, where each person found a sense of belonging. Over time, Ethan's role in the bakery shifted. While he was still there most mornings to welcome early customers and guide apprentices, he had stepped back to let others take on the daily rhythm of the place. Lily had become the bakery's driving force, bringing fresh ideas and a dynamic energy that connected with the younger generation. She was thoughtful, just as his grandmother had been, and saw the bakery not just as a business but as a community. As Lily's influence grew, she brought an array of new items to the bakery, blending the classic recipes with a modern twist. She introduced special events, including baking classes and seasonal tastings, which brought even more locals and visitors to their doors. Winter Hill Bakery became not only a place of learning and connection, but a destination, a gem of Winter Hill that people traveled miles to visit. One day, as Ethan leaned back with his coffee, he watched a small crowd of customers gather at the cafe corner, where Margaret and Helen were sharing stories from years past. The group laughed as Margaret recounted tales of the bakery's early days, of the recipes they had perfected, the times they'd burned countless loaves in the learning process, and the way the townspeople had always shown up, regardless of the bakery's ups and downs. Ethan's heart warmed at the sight. These stories had become part of the bakery's lore, part of its charm and appeal. The bakery was so much more than a business. It was woven into the fabric of the town itself, a place where everyone felt at home. One quiet afternoon, as Ethan was tidying up a display, a familiar face walked through the door. It was Maya, who had returned after a few years to visit Winter Hill and see how the bakery had evolved since her first article. "Ethan," she greeted him with a wide smile, her eyes taking in the changes to the space. "I almost didn't recognize the place. It's even more wonderful than I remember." Ethan smiled, leading her to a table by the window where they could chat. "It's grown, hasn't it? Thanks to everyone who's been a part of it. Lily, especially. She's brought so much new life here." Maya looked around, noting the faces of familiar townsfolk mingling with newcomers. "It feels like a heartbeat of Winter Hill, a place where time slows down, where people connect." She pulled out her notepad, unable to resist jotting down the scene. "I'd love to write a follow-up, Ethan. This place deserves to be celebrated even more. It's rare to find somewhere that feels as grounded, as real as Winter Hill Bakery." Ethan chuckled, a humble shake of his head. "I never expected all this attention, Maya. But if people can take something meaningful from our story, then maybe that's why we're here." They spoke for a while, reminiscing about the bakery's transformation, about the students who had come through the Bread of Tomorrow program, and the generations of townsfolk who had grown up with the bakery as their backdrop. As they talked, Maya noticed how Ethan's gaze often drifted to Lily, who moved through the bakery with ease, guiding apprentices and chatting with customers like a natural. "She's become a pillar here," Maya observed with a smile, nodding toward Lily. "It's amazing to see." Ethan's face softened with pride. "She's taken everything I taught her and made it better. Watching her, I know the bakery will be in good hands long after I'm gone." Maya paused, seeing the deep emotion in his eyes. "That's the beauty of a legacy, isn't it? It lives on, carried forward by the people who understand it, who love it." As the years continued, Winter Hill Bakery grew even further. Its reputation spread, drawing guests who had read about it in Maya's articles or seen features on television. People came from far and wide to experience the bakery's charm firsthand. And with every visitor, the bakery's story expanded, weaving new memories into its walls, new laughter into its spaces. Each season brought fresh celebrations. Spring bloomed with garden parties held outside the bakery, the tables adorned with wildflowers and fresh pastries. In the summer, they hosted an ice cream and pie festival, where families gathered to enjoy the warmth of sunny afternoons with handmade desserts. Autumn was marked by their annual Harvest of Hope Festival, where everyone came together to celebrate community, history, and tradition. And in winter, the bakery held a special event each December, a slice of Winter Hill, where they served holiday treats and hot cocoa, a gathering that brought warmth to even the coldest nights. Through it all, Ethan saw the bakery's impact ripple outward, touching lives and strengthening bonds. Students from the baking program went on to open their own bakeries, cafes, and restaurants. They sent letters back to Winter Hill, recounting how the lessons they'd learned at the bakery, about baking, yes, but also about resilience and kindness, had shaped their lives. Even Kevin, who had once only seen the bakery as a financial obligation, found himself deeply committed to its legacy. He took pride in organizing the festivals, arranging partnerships with local farmers, and ensuring the bakery's future. Kevin had found his own niche, his own way to contribute, and Ethan knew that their bond had grown stronger with each shared project, each day spent building something they both believed in. One late autumn evening, after the bakery had closed and the last customers had left, Ethan and Kevin stood together in the quiet. The world outside was silent, the streets dusted with the first hint of winter snow, the warm lights of the bakery casting a soft glow. "Remember when we first reopened?" Kevin mused, his voice filled with wonder. "It feels like a lifetime ago." Ethan smiled, remembering those early days, the struggle and the victories, the heartbreak and the joy. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Kevin nodded. "And yet, in some ways, it still feels the same. This place, it's home." They stood there for a long moment, letting the quiet settle around them. The bakery, with its years of memories and dreams, felt alive, as if it were holding its breath, listening to the voices that had filled it with life and purpose. As they locked up, Ethan placed a hand on Kevin's shoulder. "Thank you, Kevin, for everything. I never thought we'd be here together, but I'm glad we are." Kevin smiled, a look of quiet gratitude in his eyes. "I am too. This place, it's as much a part of me now as it is of you." Years later, when Ethan decided it was time to fully pass the reins to Lily, he did so with a sense of fulfillment and peace. Lily, now a young woman, had become the heart and soul of Winter Hill Bakery. She led with passion, patience, and kindness, guiding apprentices with the same love Ethan's grandmother had once shown him. On his final day as head baker, Ethan stayed late, walking through the bakery one last time, letting each detail sink in. The counters, the oven, the photos on the walls, they all held memories, each one a testament to the years he had poured into this place. As he reached the door to leave, he turned back, taking in the sight of the bakery as if for the first time. It was no longer just a bakery. It was a legacy, a place of memories and dreams that would continue to touch lives long after he was gone. He closed his eyes, picturing his grandmother beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, her warm smile lighting up the room. "We did it, Grandma," he whispered. "We really did." And with that, he turned off the lights and stepped outside, knowing that Winter Hill Bakery would carry on without him. A light for generations to come, a legacy of love, resilience, and community that would stand the test of time. Thank you for being part of this journey with Winter Hill Bakery, a story of family, resilience, and community that we hope touched your heart as much as it did ours. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more stories like this one. Your support helps us keep bringing you heartfelt tales that celebrate the power of connection and tradition. See you next time, and remember, every story is worth sharing.